Saudi Arabia, a country that occupies arguably the most unique position in the world. Central on the map, it is home to the two most sacred sites in Islam: Medina, the city and final resting place of the Prophet, and Mecca, where millions of Muslims congregate for the annual pilgrimage, circumambulating the Kaaba, the house of God, where every Muslim will face for their 5 daily prayers. As custodians of these two sites, the House of Saud occupy a position like none other. However, it's not in this vein that the Saudi family have become most infamous. Rather, as the dictatorial regime founded by the British to overthrow the Ottomans in the first half of the 20th century. A country where human rights are selective, where the ruling family live in a class of their own, living off the people's wealth and oil, while maintaining a tight repressive grip. Imperialist, waging wars openly and by proxy. A rogue state responsible for the Wahhabi ideology, the de facto state religion behind much of the political terrorism that has killed hundreds of thousands of Muslims, while under the protection of the US and the British. That being said, after decades of growth, opulence and stability, the kingdom is now going through a period of uncertainty. Figures released at the end of 2015 indicate a deficit of 100 billion, with a further 100 billion spent from the country's reserves. The IMF have warned that the current operandi is unsustainable, with the country flooding the market with oil in an attempt to outbid competition and advancements in sustainable energy. The resulting drop in the price for oil, as well as the cost incurred, has left the financial situation in a questionable state. As a result, the Saudi family are moving to privatize a number of state assets. This would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Couple this with increasing isolationism within the Middle East, with open and proxy wars taking their toll, as well as relations with the Americans not as they used to be. Similarly, the image of the country with its despicable human rights record and the way the world's media has pinned Wahhabism, the state religion, with terrorist extremism. Couple this with growing unrest, high unemployment, spiraling economic woes, and an even worse international image. It may be wishful thinking amongst the masses, but what's clear is that questions about sustainability and survival of the kingdom are now being asked. Moreover, as much as the Saudis try, such questions just will not go away.
The recent developments in Riyadh, they in a way give us a picture that the Saudis are unnerved. They are going through a period of turmoil. They're going through a period of economic stagnation. And when we say economic stagnation, that includes the budget deficit, which is in the range of $100 billion. And then the spending of their assets, burning their candle at both ends.
The Saudi oil war, it's a war. The main targets are the Russians and the Iranians. The Russians and the Iranians, the Saudis are serving not only their interests, but they're serving Western interests, some certain, not all the Western interests, because the British are hurting, but you notice that they are saying nothing. Because also the British petroleum is hurting because of low oil prices, but they are not talking. The green energy, the alternative energy companies are hurting because of it. Because when you can get cheap gas, you're not going to buy a solar panel or invest in alternative energy. Same thing for fracking, which is, you need to make money, you have to have the oil prices go a certain level. So that tells you one thing, that there is an agreement, a silent agreement, a secret agreement between certain powers to let this happen. Because if this was done by the Russians, the Americans would have created noise. If this was done by the Iranians, if they were in position to do that, the Americans would have also threw all kind of charges against the Iranians. This is you can call it a security arrangement, an economic arrangement to weaken these two countries and keep them intact. This is a strategic agreement, and the Saudis are willing to do it, although it is depleting the most important national wealth of the people of the country.
The people who are at the moment recipients, who depend on the Saudi petroleum at the moment, so they are moving quite expeditiously on the alternative sources of energy. So windmill source, nuclear source, fracking, shale gas. So as this development is taking the faster pace, by the year 2025, say 9 years from now, almost half of the clients or the customers of Saudi oil, I'm talking about the states, not the individuals, they would be switching more towards the alternative sources of energy. So the Saudis, they want to make the most of it within the next 9 years, so they get rid of their, at the moment they have 270 billion barrels of crude oil.
As nations discover alternative energy sources, the demand for oil naturally is affected. The entire Saudi machine is dependent on oil. They know that fracking, natural shale gas, and other green alternatives will affect the world's demand for oil in years to come. What's more, other oil-providing nations are keen to increase their supply onto the world market. In typical predatory fashion, the Saudis have flooded the market, increasing their output. This way they undercut both the oil-providing nations as well as the proponents of alternative energy.
The Saudis have long weaponized oil. They've long weaponized the sale of oil to their own ends. And if we look at basic economics, basic supply and demand, you see that the more that's out there, the less the demand, which has a serious impact on price.
Saudi Arabia will start selling oil strategically in order to materialize their military designs in the Middle Eastern region. If certain states with strong military base like Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan, they are desperate to be the recipient of Saudi oil, Saudi petroleum. So they might say, all right, we will sell to Pakistan, to Egypt, and to Turkey. And again, India is hugely dependent on Saudi oil. So Saudis might say, all right, 50% of that we will sell to the old conventional customers we have. And say another 25% we will sell to the countries who, down the line, in about next 5 to 10 years' time, they would remain as our military support should the NATO and the Americans withdraw militarily, partially or substantially, from the Middle Eastern region. I'm talking about the Fifth Fleet.
If the support that they rely on in the West is no longer at hand, then the regime will look to continue selling to the next highest bidders. These, however, will have to be nations in line with the Saudi foreign policy, where their hegemony in the Middle East and their international oil market continues expanding. Further proof of this transition can be found in the economic circumstances surrounding the kingdom. For the first time in decades, the Saudi monarchy have built up a budget deficit totaling 100 billion. They also spent a further 100 billion of their own cash reserves, leaving 580 billion, which the IMF predict may be depleted by 2020. These figures may not seem like much in the grand scheme of things, but it represents a crack in the wall, one that can lead to greater structural issues. Couple this with the country's rising expenditure and the drop in the price for oil, as well as the cost of flooding the oil market, and the Saudis are in an unsustainable situation. They can't continue in this way and have to make radical changes. Evidence for this is in their efforts to privatize state assets, most notably Aramco, the state oil company.
Aramco, which they plan to privatize 5 to 10% of their shares in the first phase, that will be materialized in next 3 to 5 years' time. If that is done, they would be raising like maybe $500 billion. Aramco is a mega institution and business in the world. It's one of the top 10 companies in the world. So even 10% of that, if that is privatized. So that could be $500 billion.
What's at stake here is a struggle for influence and survival. And this is Saudi Arabia engaging in a region that's hugely in turmoil. For the past 5 years, obviously, post-Arab uprisings, the whole region's been turned on its head and people have been struggling to meet their basic needs. Long autocratic, embedded regimes, authoritarian regimes have been ousted. And Saudi Arabia has been really the driving force at the vanguard of that conservative movement to ensure that the region stays as is. Now, Iran has long sensed opportunities to turn the region on its head a little bit, to provide support for Shia groups across the region, but also to try and increase its power. So you've got a bit of a dichotomy here with the Saudis wanting to maintain the regional status quo and the Iranians sensing an opportunity to maybe improve their standing in the region. And I think that with this turmoil, with this chaos, with certain states going down the route of maybe having a bit more of a crisis than others, such as Syria, for instance, then certain states have sensed an opportunity to increase their standing within the region. So in the case of Syria, many see that Saudi Arabia has sensed an opportunity to win it back to the so-called Arab fold, to turn its influence away from Iran, to topple Bashar al-Assad, and to increase its influence both in Syria but also in Lebanon, and to reduce the influence of Hezbollah, obviously, because of the connection between Syria, Lebanon, and Iran.
The Saudi monarchy has funded and waged proxy wars across the globe against Iran and against other powers. Against Iran started in the 1980 exactly, when they used Saddam Hussein to launch an aggressive war against Iran. That was the Saudis with the Americans working together to get Saddam, the renegade, to attack Iran, and the Iranians swallowed that trap or entered that trap, not knowing that it was part of a larger conspiracy. And, their war against Iran has spread across the globe. Their anti-Shia campaign is across the globe, and Iran is in the center of that. So the Saudis, yes, they have been waging proxy wars by supporting terrorist groups. ISIS, is Saudi proxy. Al-Qaeda, in part of it, not all of it, is a Saudi proxy. Qatar controls a part, and Saudi Arabia controls another. But other groups like Jaish al-Islam, Ahrar al-Sham, and others are part of the Saudi proxy groups. And you have other groups in Pakistan like Sabah Sahaba and Taliban, Tahrik Taliban Pakistan, and Lashkar Taiba and others, and that is part of the Saudi proxy war. The Saudi proxy war is not necessarily militarily, it could be diplomatic. That is how the Saudis operate.
It is said by the military strategists that you cannot defeat an enemy who has created the advanced post in your mind. So Iran has occupied some post in the minds of Saudi Arabia. There's a competition going on. There is a scramble for leadership in the region. Iran has got 5,000 years of history, a great civilization. And on the contrary, the Saudis, they're the nomads. They're the Bedouins from Najd. So Iranian culture, Iranian education, Iranian civilization, Iranian society, all these things are embodiment of refinement. Now Iran is making headway towards nuclear development, and Saudi Arabia is still nowhere near that idea, atom for peace, making use of nuclear power. So this is another area. Then oil production, rivalry is there. Then ideology. Iran is a Shia country. Saudi Arabia is a Wahhabi country. Iran has been living peacefully with the Sunnis and the Hanafis, who were the large majority of the Muslims, entire Muslim population, 57 countries. So Iran has been living peacefully. So all these factors, they create a sort of situation where Iran and Saudi Arabia are face to face to each other.
There is a very strong fear at play here, and the Saudis are concerned about what's happening externally. They're concerned about the problematic relationship that they have with the US right now. The notion that they've been putting a lot of pressure on the US to do something about the Iranian threat, whatever that may be. And the US has ultimately resisted doing anything militarily against Iran and has ultimately signed a deal with them, the nuclear deal. So that's caused many in Riyadh a great deal of concern and consternation. But it's also led to them trying to act in other spheres to try and weaken the Iranian influence. And they're also sensing, they've got the perception that Iran is trying to do the same thing, that Iran is trying to manipulate Shia groups across the region. The notion that Iran is trying to unite the Shia of the Middle East into what King Abdullah of Jordan termed the Shia Crescent. So all of this is driven by fear and perception and a misreading of events, I think. There's a great deal of concern about what's actually happening, and Saudi is responding in terms of this perception.
The Saudi response has been multifaceted. The paranoia and insecurity is manifested in a number of ways, and most prominently in the so-called Syrian revolution, where Saudi funding enabled the emergence of a catalogue of terrorist organizations, most notably Daesh. These groups have wreaked havoc throughout Syria and Iraq in the aim of dismantling this de facto Shia crescent, just as King Abdullah labelled it. The various militant groups who espouse the radical state version of Wahhabism are conducting the Saudis' dirty work under the guise of grassroots political radicalism and religious fundamentalism. Unsurprisingly, the Iranians have not sat back and have aided their allies in the region. They too have funded other resistance groups, including Hezbollah, the Lebanese resistant group who have long been a thorn in the eye of the Israelis.
The Saudi state is ready now to move to another stage. That stage is open alliance with Israel. It's no longer hidden. And there is even news today that the Saudi Deputy Crown Prince, the son of the king, Mohammed bin Salman, met with Netanyahu in Jordan in a secret meeting. And it's possible, we don't know if this is true or not, but it's highly likely because the relationship between the Al Saud and the Israeli state are old.
You see that there is a great deal of tension amongst the GCC states. You see the threats that the Saudis were going to blockade Qatar for sponsoring the Muslim Brotherhood over disputes in Syria, in terms of what certain think tanks in Doha were publishing. And predominantly, I think, because that on the world stage and financially, some of the smaller GCC states have much more influence in terms of their soft power. Saudi's got a great deal of concern about how it's being viewed externally. And that means that it's having to look elsewhere. And its more traditional allies are maybe not quite doing what they think that they should be doing. So you see this pivot maybe back to Egypt after the Morsi period. You see maybe a thawing of relations with Israel. I mean, you see the comments from the Saudi foreign minister quite regularly saying that we're not going to normalize relations with Israel, because that would be problematic for many across the Arab street. Again, whatever that might be, but I think there'd be a number of people who would be concerned at the normalization of relations with Israel. But beneath the surface, I think we're starting to see a growing concern and a growing relationship with Israel because of this concern about Iran. And a number of people have spoken to me about how this is going to start to happen and has been happening for a while now. It's not on the surface, it's beneath the surface.
The growing relationship with Israel highlights the shift and desperation of the Saudi regime. Aligning with a country that has brutalized your fellow Arab Muslims highlights the fact that the Saudi monarchy do not sit as cozy with the other countries in the Middle East. Their natural allies no longer see eye to eye, and this again begs whether a shift towards Israel is an attempt to shore up their unnerved position. Is this a matter of desperation, or is this another cog in their machine to shore up their survival and influence and standing in the Middle East?
The Saudi monarchy could not see a neighboring people being free from their hegemony. That's why they invaded Bahrain, and I underline the word invaded, and they destroyed the birth of democracy in Egypt. They ruined the progress for democracy in Syria. They destroyed Iraq, and they fought any progressive movement toward people's power in Tunisia, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, anywhere they can do it, even in Malaysia, where they spent over $600 million to get a government that is dictatorial, anti-Shia, and submissive to the Saudi monarchy. So the Saudi wars are not new, and they indicate this endless fear that they would collapse. If you look at the history of the Middle East, you would see since 1953 the collapse of the Egyptian monarchy, followed by the Iraqi monarchy, followed by the Yemeni monarchy, theocracy, then the Libyan, and then the Iranian, the Shah, absolute monarchy. That trend is continuing historically, and the Saudis are the only one who have been able to slow it down. They have stopped it so far. So how long can they stop it? It's really unknown. But they have succeeded in preventing the birth of democracy and people's government, independent government in Egypt and other places, even in Iraq, let alone Bahrain and other countries.
While this constant meddling, bribery and back-channeling has seen to their survival thus far, the coronation of King Salman saw a shift in policy and desperation. In March of 2015, the Saudi regime launched Operation Decisive Storm to quash the popular uprising of the Yemeni people, a country long been a part of the Saudi hegemony. Kim Sharif, a human rights solicitor of Yemeni origin, has long been campaigning for the Yemeni people, representing their case on many platforms, including the United Nations.
Saudi Arabia has always, over the 100 years that it's been, the ruling family, that's Al Saud, have been in governance of the region, have always tried to get Yemen to be part of its kingdom. And several attempts were made historically to do that, which resulted in utter failure. And it has always been interfering and meddling with the affairs of Yemen. Up to the time, especially from the time that the former president Ali Abdullah Saleh took control, the whole of Yemen became effectively, especially the north at that time, under the control and command of the Saudi regime. In fact, we've discovered documentary evidence to show that the salaries of the government officials, including Saleh and his men, were being paid by the Saudi regime. So they effectively had control of the country indirectly that way. There was a quango set up in the Saudi ruling family specifically dealing with the Yemen affairs. In other words, governing the Yemen that way indirectly, purchasing the conscience of those people who are meant to be looking after the country. And if you look at the history of Yemen, you will find from the time Saleh took over about 33 years ago, the country has been in decline economically, socially, and in many other ways, to the point that it has become the poorest and weakest country in the region, even though it is full of natural resources, oil and other minerals that could have been exploited for the benefit of the country and the people. Unfortunately, that hasn't been done. What really happened then in reality is, I believe when the Iranian revolution took place, the Saudis started to feel threatened already for their existence, that the Saudi ruling family started to feel a threat for their own existence, and they started pumping large amounts of monies in the, for example, southern parts of Hadramaut region, Aden, that area. By which I mean they started sending their schools, their madrasas, their sheikhs and everything, to the point that that region that was historically Sufi, Shafi and partly Zaydi became Wahhabized without even realizing that they have become Wahhabized. Today, if you ask a lot of the good Yemeni people from the south, what is your madhab? They will tell you we are Shafi or Sufi or Zaydi. But then you will ask them, shall we go and visit the grave of Mulana so and so? And they will tell you, that's bid'ah. So you can see how they got Wahhabized without realizing. Now, Saleh and the other people who were in charge of the south at the time were aware of this movement and haven't done anything to stop it, because they were just enjoying the money they were receiving, having their lush lifestyles. And then came the Arab Spring in 2011, which, as you know, deposed the former president Ali Abdullah Saleh, because the people just got fed up by then. Unfortunately, the Saudis wouldn't let go of the Yemen. They meddled in the affairs again, presenting themselves as the peacemaking, bona fide people who want to sort this crisis out for their beloved neighbor. But really, behind it, there was a political going on. And what really then happened was they put into place what has become known as the Gulf Initiative. And the Gulf Initiative's effect was to put the Yemen constitution in abeyance, to put the caretaker president Abdul Rabbu Mansour Hadi, to be a caretaker president for an initial period of 2 years to enable general elections to take place for the people to choose their own government. This is a republic after all. So there was meant to be a democratic process taking place within a period of 2 years. That is the Gulf Initiative. 2 years had elapsed and Mr. Hadi failed to deliver anything because he himself was part of that old corrupt regime of Ali Abdullah Saleh. In fact, he was the deputy of Ali Abdullah Saleh for 17 years. And also he continued to receive his own payments and salaries and so forth. 2 years had elapsed, nothing had happened. And by September, then by agreement among the people of the Yemen, the leading figures of the country, they decided to extend his term by another year. These people who come to this agreement are, by the way, a group of people that Hadi himself handpicked and selected to be the people who will extend his period of caretaking presidency. That period also itself was about to expire in February 2015. And so by September 2014, the people of the Yemen, led by a coalition of the army, the Yemen army, huge army, United Yemen North and South Army, huge army. And the leaders of the tribes, Yemen is very tribal, and they have tribal elders representing the wishes and feelings of the groups of communities they represent. And leaders of political parties came together and stood outside the presidential palace in Sana'a and said, we're not leaving until you fix this mess, i.e., where is the election? Where is the everything that had been agreed upon under the so-called Gulf Initiative? You haven't complied with anything, because by then they had something like 6 months left for his extended period to expire. And of course, as we all know, that led to the political parties, of which included also the Houthi Ansarullah party. The Houthis are descendants of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. They are Zaydis. And they have a political party called Ansarullah. Ansarullah contains Houthis and non-Houthis. Together with tribal elders, together with political parties and the army, get together, take over the capital of Sana'a, and Abdul Rabbu Hadi Mansour decides to run away and goes to the south in women's clothing. And the coalition of these people invited him back to take control of his position, but to do what was agreed upon. Twice he was invited to do that. He failed to do it. So in the end, it was left to them to then decide what to do next, now that they've taken the capital and many other regions, including substantial parts of the south. And they agreed upon every point of what is to happen for the new country. There was meant to be a transitional period, and by agreement of all those concerned, and everyone agreed on everything, apart from the name of the president. There's a man called Jamal Ben. Jamal Ben was a UN representative for Yemen affairs. He was involved in all these negotiations among the political parties and the coalition. And he will testify, if he is a truthful man, if he's called today, that the Yemenis had agreed on everything. Apart from the name of the president, they had several people put forward. And shortly before they could then come back and name the president, the Saudis felt extremely threatened. Threatened because at that stage it would have meant Yemen would become an independent state, self-governing, as it is in fact entitled to be, under international law, local law, and all other laws that are known to man, divine laws and man-made laws. Both of them confirm that Yemen is entitled to be an independent state without having anyone meddling with its affairs, like the Saudis have been doing for so long. Now, when obviously the UN representative positive reports back to them that these people are now all happy and everything is working out right for them, they felt threatened. And so at that stage, Hadi was still hiding somewhere in the south. Unbeknown to him, the Saudis then commenced the bombardment, hysterical bombardment of the Yemen.
To date, the war in Yemen has revealed more about the Saudi regime than much of the previous decades gone by. Part of that is the media blackout that has left the Yemeni people at the behest of the brutal Saudi dictatorship. Thousands have been killed in the conflict, with the international community effectively turning a blind eye. A number of large-scale atrocities have made traction on social media, however the mainstream remain aloof. In this way, a number of social activists have used Facebook and Twitter to voice the situation on the ground. One such individual is journalist Hussein al-Bukhaiti, who updates his accounts with the situation on the ground.
In Yemen, we are not causing any threat for the Saudi. Ansarullah the Houthi have never ever attacked the Saudi border, but I think what the Saudi seen as the threat, that they were afraid that the Ansarullah the Houthi will control the whole country. This will show the Saudi really weak inside Yemen, and as well it will show them weak inside Saudi, because they have been controlling Yemen for many years. The destruction that the Saudi have caused for over a year of their war campaign against Yemen has caused Yemeni a huge damage. They have targeted almost everything. They have targeted schools, mosques, all infrastructure, our road. And just I have some numbers. There are 9,136 people were killed. 5,000 of them were men, 1,600 women, and 2,300 children. And the wounded were 16,690. And we have a total destruction of Yemen infrastructure. Just they have destroyed 14 airports, 11 ports and harbor, and 135 station and power generators, and 648 mosques, and 630 schools and education institute, 250 health facilities, 145 tourist facilities, and 70 historic sites. And I mean they have actually destroyed almost everything. They have destroyed 622 bridges across Yemen. So I think that the damage that have caused will be in hundreds of billions. I don't think Yemen will ever recover.
The figures are staggering. How the international community have been silent is beyond comprehension. Thousands of civilians killed. Women, children, elderly, even disabled schools have not been spared. Hospitals, water plants, power stations. It has been a full-on destruction. Despite the incessant violence and large-scale destruction, the Saudi coalition have still failed in their objectives. The Yemeni people continue to defend their territory, even making gains into some of the Saudi border towns. This has only intensified their hysteria, highlighting their inability to defend their borders against the paramilitary force, despite the billions spent on their own armies.
They were told that they could take Sana'a within 10 days, and they sincerely believed that's what was going to happen. 14 countries altogether, including members of the Security Council with all their weapons, money and everything, could not take over this weak, small, poor country of the Gulf states. There's also this amazing movement in the country itself of awakening. From post-Arab Spring, the people have become aware of their reality, that this can't continue anymore. And there is a popular support for the movement of Ansarullah. A lot of people joined them, and they continue to join them. They have become now a respected political party. So they have miscalculated the whole situation. As you know, in all their channels, they've been claiming, we are within inches of Sana'a. We are within inches of Sana'a. Month after month in Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya, they kept saying this. But have they really gone anywhere near Sana'a? No. In fact, the reverse has happened. The reverse has happened in the sense that the army and the coalition parties that are working with them, fighting with them, defending the country for over a year now, despite the hysterical bombardment and blockade and everything, they moved on to take southern parts of Saudi border towns of Jazan, Najran, and Asir. So this was unexpected development. And subhanAllah, with the resources that they have, they're doing amazing work. It's just shocking to just see that they have come thus far.
I believe that the main cause of Saudi Arabia, supported by the United States, Britain and France and many other countries, the main goal of the Saudi is to stop the spread of Ansarullah or Ansarullah control of all Yemen. And this is not because that Ansarullah themselves are a threat to the Saudi. No, this is because that Ansarullah are the only fighting force that have succeeded in fighting Al-Qaeda. If we compare in other, in Afghanistan, has been years of war against Al-Qaeda. They haven't defeated. As well in Yemen, Yemeni previous regime with the US, they tried to fight Al-Qaeda, but they failed. But Ansarullah has cleared most of the south in several days. So this was a threat to the Saudi, because the Saudi want Yemen to be a hub for Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda recruitment. We know that Yemen was the main hub for Al-Qaeda recruitment to Afghanistan when they were fighting the Russian. As well, Yemen was as well one of the main hubs to send fighters to Iraq and to Syria and to Libya. And the Saudi want to keep Yemen as this way, to keep Yemen as a backyard for their dirt and for their crimes. And whenever they want to destroy a country, they will just start their fatwa and recruiting fighters inside Yemen, which they do now elsewhere. So Ansarullah, the Houthi, have succeeded in defeating Al-Qaeda, and I think the existence of Al-Qaeda helped the presence of the United States in the region, and this was as well a threat for the United States. They want Al-Qaeda to stay, because if there is no Al-Qaeda in the region, what will be the excuse to come in Yemen? What will be the excuse to have ships in all Yemen water and across the coastal line of Yemen and other countries? So the United States see Ansarullah as a threat in this way, because they don't want any stability in Yemen. They want Yemen to be as it was during the Afghan or the Mujahideen war, and they want Yemen to stay as it was before. And I think this is the main reason and the only reason, because Al-Qaeda are working side by side with the Saudi and with the United States. It might be not directly, but of course through the Saudi religious wing, Al-Wahhabi, which they always use their fatwa to attack anyone or to kill anyone or to destroy any country.
The opinions of Hussein represent a lot of the sentiment on the ground. The Saudis fear losing their hegemony over Yemen, who have proved to be a significant ally up until the Arab Spring. The fear of losing their grip of control indicates the wider fear they have when it comes to the entire region. This has meant that the Saudis have pushed even further, deploying more artillery and gunfire to the already dire situation. Having already invested so much, the Saudis cannot be seen as wilting against an army made up predominantly by civilians.
They upped the game by getting mercenaries. They upped the game by getting Janjaweeds from Sudan. They upped the game by getting Senegalese soldiers. They upped the game by getting Somalians. They started purchasing Somalis, literally wholesome like that, going to the northern Somalian part and just buying Somalis to come over to fight the Houthi, and then end up being killed and killed and killed. And so, as the Yemenis say, Yemen is a graveyard for invaders. It's never been possible for anyone to take total control of the Yemen.
In the weeks and months that followed, international condemnation from various different human rights groups began gaining more noise and traction. With so many civilians dying, the legality of the conflict was now under intense scrutiny. The already tarnished image of the Saudis was becoming even more murkier, with increased pressure on Britain and the US, who were supplying the arms.
We've seen hospitals bombed, we've seen schools bombed, we've seen all sorts of vital services bombed and destroyed, and there's been very little accountability to that. The international community hasn't held Saudi Arabia accountable at all. In fact, the arms sales have continued, that political support has only continued. There's also a growing consensus it's not just immoral, it's also illegal. It's being condemned by the European Parliament, it's been condemned by the UN, it's been condemned by Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty International, by Matrix Chambers, by Oxfam, by a whole host of organisations. We are taking a legal action against the government. We believe that the arms sales are facilitating violations of international humanitarian law. And on paper, UK arms export policy is very clear. On paper, it says that if there is any risk that weapons might be used in order to violate international humanitarian law, then the arms sales need to be suspended. We don't believe these arms should have been sold to Saudi Arabia in the first place. It has a terrible human rights record for decades and decades, and yet has remained the largest buyer of UK arms throughout most of that time as well. We want to see an end to arms which are being used in Yemen, but we want to see an end to arms sales to Saudi full stop. We don't think there should be any more going forward. The character of the regime is utterly abusive, and its foreign policy is based on aggression and is destroying Yemen right now. And there's a real human cost to it. These aren't kind of abstract numbers, these are people's lives, and there are bombs which are being made in the UK which are destroying people's homes. There are bombs and fighter jets which are made in the UK which are ending people's lives, and yet our government's role has been to just turn the other cheek and ignore it and pretend it's not happening, and is taking the word of the Saudi government. Well, we don't think that's good enough, and we want to test this in a court of law, and I think it needs to be opposed not just in the streets and protests but also in court of law.
As the campaign against the arm trade built their legal case, reports then emerged of Britain and America directly partaking in the conflict, without any vote in Parliament or inclination to the public whatsoever.
The Americans now are directly physically involved in the war in the Yemen. In that, last week, the American Marines and British Marines have landed in the port of Aden and filled themselves in the military base of Anad, which is in the south. And this is a very, very worrying and unacceptable development in the international platform. They are saying they are there to fight the spread or the increase of terrorism in that southern part. The evidence shows that the Saudis were giving the go-ahead to their militias that they purchased with their money in the southern part to let Al-Qaeda take certain parts without any resistance. We have a WikiLeaks letter to show that, coming from the ministries of Saudi Arabia. Saudis are working with these people. We know that because these people are providing logistics and intelligence, correct? So, to say that they are fighting terror is completely unacceptable, and it's a plain and simple lie. Because in the same way they haven't been able to to fight terror in Iraq and Syria, they're not there to do that either in the south of Yemen. And letters from their own friend Saudi Arabia shows that they were allowed to go and take over substantial parts of the southern areas of Hadramaut, Zanzibar, Mukalla, Aden, and everywhere. It's a deliberate plan so that they later can say, "Oh, we are here to fight terror."
The involvement of Western forces confirmed that the Saudi military have failed miserably, an embarrassment on their part, as they failed to defeat the poorest Arab nation despite the billions in military and technological capabilities. What's more, WikiLeaks cables reveal Saudi links to Al-Qaeda in the region, who have also been employed to wage their cowardly means on the Yemeni people. Desperate for victory, evidence of banned munitions has also surfaced, highlighting the Saudis' desperation, with illegal cluster bombs made in both the UK and US appearing up and down the country. Cluster bombs are warheads that contain hundreds of smaller bomblets. They are released before impact and spread haphazardly. There is no telling where they will land. In this way, they are designed to cause maximum damage over as large an area as possible. The small bomblets also have the tendency to land but not explode, acting as mines which detonate weeks or even months later. Cluster bombs have therefore been made illegal under international law.
The Saudi fighter jet have dropped hundreds of US-made cluster bombs just in the north region of Sa'da and Hajjah. there are tens of thousands of cluster bomb munition. Just in my last visit, I have brought this cluster bomb, which they called Blue 97 AB. Those were dropped in Nushur, North Saada. And as well, they have this kind of umbrella which make them like spread in a large area. These were dropped on a village, North Saada area called Nushur. And of course, when we went there, I've seen many kids running toward us because they saw us with cameras, and they brought those kind of bombs. And the bright color, the yellow bright color, this will attract kids. And I think this is a danger that will stay for generation in Yemen. And this is well one of the United States support to the Saudi and the constant support of the Saudi war in Yemen.
Anytime you ask the arms companies, why do you sell weapons to governments that behead people, governments that imprison people for sending tweets, governments that torture their opponents, the response is always the same, which is that they are only selling weapons to governments who the UK has relationships with, and therefore it's the UK government that is to blame for companies like them selling weapons like these. At the same time, the UK government will always tell us that it has this rigorous and robust arms export control policy. And it's worth pointing out that the government isn't just a spectator in the arms trade, it's an active participant. We see this through its organisation of events like the Dicey Arms Fair, which happens in London every 2 years and brings some of the most oppressive regimes in the world together with some of the biggest arms companies. But there's actually a body in the civil service in the UK, UKTI Defence and Security Organisation, which employs about 130 civil servants for the sole purpose of promoting arms exports abroad. Their sole job is to do all that they can to increase profits for arms companies and maximise arms sales. This is despite the fact that the government's role is meant to be to regulate the trade. How can it be regulating a trade it's actively encouraging? How can it be regulating a trade which it's actively promoting and committing time and resources into promoting?
As for the international community, it's saying, well, no, enough is enough. Unfortunately, it bears responsibility, in my opinion, legally. The UN and the Security Council are vicariously liable for the war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide that have taken place in the Yemen, and use of illegal and prohibited weapons. And they must be held to account for this.
Since David Cameron came to office, there's been almost £7 billion worth of arms sales to Saudi Arabia from Britain. And the cost of that isn't just providing military support, it's also providing a political support. It sends out a stamp of approval from the UK. It provides that complicity in what those weapons are used for, but also with the government who are using them. It means that countries aren't just buying weapons, they're also buying support, and very often they're buying silence as well.
The silence from the international community has been deafening, topped only by the complicity of the UK and the US, who are making the onslaught possible. One can only wonder whether their complicity is due to the increased sales of weapons. In fact, just how much of the instability in the Middle East is driven by this industry, and to what extent are the billions of dollars spent by the Saudis helping to keep Western nations quiet. That in itself proves that Saudis are paying a price for the complicity they are finding, which means the US and the UK have their own interests. The Saudis know this and realize that one day the Western support they are currently enjoying may not be there. This in itself adds to the insecurities surrounding the kingdom, who continue to add to their military stockpile as an insurance for their own existence.
The Saudis, they know their state is not 100% legitimate. They have occupied the territories of other people. They are behaving like pariahs. And there is a fear. The fear of losing possessions, the fear of losing power, that is there. In order to overcome that fear, what you need weapons. You need armies.
When military relationships are formed, they're not just military relationships, they're also political relationships. They're also relationships where you buy support, where you buy endorsement, and where you buy silence, and where you buy complicity. And I think that's exactly what Saudi Arabia has been doing for years. One of the arguments which gets put forward by the arms exporting nations is that if we're selling these countries weapons, we can also influence them and we'll change their practices and things like that. But of course, this is ridiculous. It's never worked in practice. There's no example in history of a human rights abusing government by changing its ways in order to buy weapons, because the power of relationship will always be with the buyer. In terms of what I think the exporting nations want to see, do they want to see war continue? Well, I think the arms companies, as I say, can only turn over profit as long as there's war and as long as there's conflict or as long as there's the threat of war and conflict. I think in all these cases human rights plays a second fiddle to arms company profits.
The idea that arms sales trump human rights proves to be an uncomfortable truth. Not only is this substantiated by the war in Yemen, which has revealed the absolute neglect for human life, but also the true face of the Saudi monarchy, who will stop at nothing to shore up their existence. So scared are they of any opposition, violence and brutality has become their survival mechanism. It seems they have no other way, for the repression and subjugation inside the kingdom mirrors the continued fear and insecurity they display against their neighbours. Various human rights groups work tirelessly to put pressure on the Saudi regime, highlighting the extent of abuse, from political prisoners to the treatment of women and migrant workers. This was proved most true on January 2nd, 2016, when King Salman ordered the execution of Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr.
The execution of Ayatollah Sheikh Nimr was a very, very shocking development. They want to send a message to the others. It's very important for the Saudi royal family to use an example, to make an example of people who cannot react. So they execute people to scare. Kill one, scare 100. And that's exactly what they did with Sheikh Nimr. If you cross that line, you get executed. And they are willing to kill half of the population.
I call it murder because it's extrajudicial in every sense of the word, that we understand what judicial process, justice and fairness is. That is the murder of Sheikh Nimr. Why was he killed? Because he spoke against the regime. That's all he did. So he's killed for speaking the truth as he sincerely believes it, for holding an opinion. So he's been murdered for that. We know under the laws of Allah and the laws of man-made, that amounts to murder.
It shows that they fear these voices. There is no political gain for them by executing. There's no actual reason to execute these people, even the Sunni prisoners. But they wanted to set an example.
The execution of Sheikh Nimr highlighted the paranoia of the regime. No stable monarchy sure of their stability would employ such draconian methods. Despite their wealth and assets, the fear of dissent within the kingdom leaves a stench of insecurity amongst the royal family. In this way they have oppressed and subjugated their people, instilling fear of every kind, for they know that they are in the minority, without much support amongst the many tribes and sects that make up the population.
The Al Saud they don't want to have a national identity in the country. They want people to be divided around tribal, regional, sectarian lines, because this is how you apply that classic saying, divide and rule.
In the tribal setup, the leadership is vested with a person or group of persons who are powerful, who have weapons, who have armies. So King Abdulaziz, he made Saudi Arabia militarily strong. The weapons, they came from Britain, from United States, from France and elsewhere. So on the same model, they capitalized. And today what Saudis are, Saudis have weapons, they have the aircraft, fighter aircraft, combat aircraft. They have main battle tanks, they have latest artillery pieces. Everything they have. Whatever you need in a modern day army's inventory, they have it. For the last 10 years, they have been spending $50 billion or so. So the military prowess, the military might, that is ensuring their survival.
The Saudi, in that country, there is not a national icon, even in sport, because is he from my tribe? Is he from my region? Is he from my sect? That's important. That's why there is no national champion or national figure. That there is no national identity in that country, and that's done on purpose by the Saudi ruling family. No wonder you see the Saudi government sentencing Sunni people to jail because they have Shia friends, or forcibly divorcing Sunni women from Shia men who were married in love and legally and so on, because dividing that country over these lines is important for their own family. Even within Sunni, even within Wahhabi adherents, you have the people in the south, the people of the Najd, you have the tribal and non-tribal. The Saudis invest a lot of time and effort in creating that fitna, we call it in Arabic, between the different groups.
Saudi Arabia has not been tested so far in a war-like situation. War with Saddam wasn't a war. Small skirmishes in Yemen, or they are doing the aerial strikes on Yemen and Syria. That's not a war. The real war is the main war that is fought on the territory. The military war, the war by the soldiers having foot on the ground. So that Saudi Arabia hasn't experienced. So we haven't tested the loyalty of these tribes. They might say, all right, we break away from you. But as long as Saudi Arabia keeps distributing the money to those tribal chiefs they have, and ensuring that the Saudi royal elite, royal family, royal hierarchy, they are powerful with the military, and they're well connected to the international powers like United States, Britain, European Union, and NATO. The Saudis will keep on, in a way, they have subdued all those tribes. The real test will occur, let's see, when Saudi Arabia enters into that phase where every tribal chief say, all right, this is my wish list. I want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These things must be sorted if you want my support to you. So that situation we haven't seen yet.
The isolated nature of the Saudi regime leaves it in a precarious position inside the country. Of course, the US spends billions on their military bases around the country, providing an added insurance against internal upheaval. However, questions surrounding the relationship between the US and Saudi Arabia continue to be asked. The 9/11 bill which Congress have passed will reveal a secret 28-page report uncovering links between Saudi Arabia and the attacks on 9/11. The Saudis have threatened to sell $750 billion worth of US assets in retaliation. However, the full story is yet to materialize. With both sides desperate to keep their secrets hidden, relations between the two are not what they used to be. But truth be told, neither has another option. Oil will continue to be the binding factor. In this vein, political commentators are aligned with the economists when they say that the Saudi regime is too reliant on oil. The question is, do the Saudis have any other options? Similarly, reports of exaggerated oil reserves are common when the number of barrels being pumped are reducing year on year. It is therefore no surprise the Deputy Crown Prince, the real power behind the scenes, is so desperate to shift the country's economic strategy. Ultimately, the question remains as to whether this is the beginning of the regime's decline. But what is for sure is that this is a testing time for the Saudi family. Couple this with the ongoing conflict in Yemen, where there's no end in sight, as well as the rising international anger and condemnation with Wahhabism facing real opposition and media scrutiny. All in all, you have a whirlwind of social, economic, political and military trials, each with the potential of bringing more strain to the already difficult period facing the Saudi regime. How they will pull through and steady their ship is yet to be seen.